In this lesson, you will consider the key ideas in the poem Death of a Naturalist. You'll explore the language in detail. I want you to study how the precise meaning is crafted in literary language. Particularly, we're going to focus on the attitude and the emotional impact that is crafted in the phonemes, so that the mood and emotion of the poet is explored. I want you to reflect on the use of the memory to shape the significant emotional impact that is crafted and gone into the inspiration of the poem. We're going to deconstruct and understand the nature of narrative recounting and how that shapes point of view, and to explore the creation of poetic voice and the subsequent viewpoint. When you were at primary school, did you go on a nature walk, or was there a nature table where you were asked to bring in and collect things? I want you to think a few moments about what you did and what children learned from those experiences. What ideas about exploration, learning, are thrown up by that investigation, and their sense of innocence, how they see the world and understand the world. But then as an adult looking back on that, what more mature ideas do you know about and what happens in the scientific process? Think particularly of frogspawn and tadpoles and the development of frogs that is at the heart of Death of a Naturalist. You now take a clean copy of the poem and two different colour highlighters. I want you to highlight all of the positive words in one colour and any negative words or words with negative connotations in another. Try and do that quite quickly in about 5 minutes. And then I want you to think about what you notice about the two aspects and what makes something positive or negative. If you look at all of the negative words like festered, heavy-headed, rotted, sods, sweltered, punishing, gargled, bluebottles, smell, slobber, clotted, fattening, burst, rank, cowdung, angry, invaded, coarse, gross-bellied, cocked, sods, loose, pulsed, obscene, threats, grenades, blunt, farting, sickened, turned, ran, slime, vengeance, spawn, clutch. Most of those words, which are spaced at the beginning and ends of the poem, are also very, very emotive, powerful words. Look at the consonants, the short vowels and the harsh plosives. Look also again a little more carefully at the use of fricatives. So you've got the blue bottles, the pulsed. Think also about the positives, how they're far more delicate. And even if they've got plosives in bubbles, they're comical, childlike, innocent, and jampotfuls and jellied, and schooled and swimming tadpoles and daddy frog and mammy frog and frogspawn and yellow and sun. Look through again at the different sounds and think about which sounds make it pleasant and which add of tension or uneasiness. A naturalist is a scientist, someone who studies the world of nature or natural history. And in the poem, Seamus Heaney is exploring the way in which he grew up, excited and interested in the world of nature. But then something happened in his life to change that, which put him off, that spoilt that innocent study of the processes of living. Look at this image here of a child exploring the natural world, the world of life. I want you to list all of the things that children gain from being taken outside to explore the natural world, and think about all the positive and negative experiences of human life that they can discover, and how adults taking children out into that world might deal with those issues.
Death of a Naturalist. All year the flax-dam festered in the heart of the townland. Green and heavy-headed flax had rotted there, weighted down by huge sods. Daily it sweltered in the punishing sun. Bubbles gargled delicately. Bluebottles wove a strong gauze of sound around the smell. There were dragonflies, spotted butterflies, but best of all was the warm, thick slobber of frogspawn, that grew like clotted water in the shade of the banks. Here, every spring, I would fill jampotfuls of the jellied specks to range on window sills at home, on shelves at school, and wait and watch until the fattening dots burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Miss Walls would tell us how the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and how he croaked, and how the mammy frog laid hundreds of little eggs, and this was frogspawn. You could tell the weather by frogs too, for they were yellow in the sun and brown in rain. Then, one hot day, when fields were rank with cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax-dam. I ducked through hedges to a coarse croaking that I had not heard before. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Right down the dam, gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped. The slap and plop were obscene threats. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. I sickened, turned, and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it.
If you look at stanza 1, or the section here anyway, then you can see a vast number of different techniques used by Heaney to construct a mass of sounds, the music of the experience. To start with, he structures the memory of his past, of exploring nature through the temporal markers. So you've got all year, daily it sweltered, there were, and in the shade of the banks. So you've got those references to the past. You also got references to this place, the space. He reconstructs that memory for us through those adverbials. And you've also got the deictic pronoun pushing us into the past. Flax had rotted there, in that place. And then here as well, in the last line of this section, that brings us to the place. So there is in the past, but here we're taken to that place to make it more immediate. Now let's look at the use of some of the sounds. You've got flax-dam festered, so the alliteration makes that stand out, visceral, the fricative, bringing its tension. You've also got the sibilance of the x in the x and the s in festered, so there's a resonant sound underlying that. You've also got the shift in the vowel sound from the year to the heart, and those sounds are soft, but they bracket that line with an easy comfortness. The same longer vowels are seen in town and green, weighted down and huge. It slows the lines down so that they feel comfortable and pleasant. Even when you've got the shorter vowels of flax had rotted there, o. And even the heavy-headed, those tense things there are weighed down by the longer vowel sounds that make it a little more comfortable. Similarly in daily, it slows even though it's sweltered. And you've also got a number of plosives in things like punishing, bubbles, gargled delicately, bluebottles. They punctuate that word and create a sense of interest. The gargling, bubbling noises of sound, the bluebottles. And even though the sun is punishing, the assonance reinforces that, the the punishing sun and the bubbles. Even those sounds are there, they're softer at the moment. And when the bluebottles do things, they wove a strong gauze. So you've got those slow vibrating sounds in z, and that vibration at the back of the throat creates that pleasant sound, but it's delicate still. The whole thing evokes the smell with the olfactory senses to create the sense of place. And again, with the dragonflies and the butterflies, the sound is there again. Zzz, zzz. And then we've got a contrasting connective, but, and the superlative. But best was the warm, thick slobber of frogspawn. Look at the consonants there. Thick slobber of frogspawn. Clotted water. The short vowels of o, and the fricatives and the plosives of t and water and slobber. They create a little bit of excitement there in that superlative moment. And then it's calm again in the long vowel of the shade of the banks. All of this creates a visceral experience as Heaney recreates the joy of finding those things as a child, the joy and innocence of frogspawn. In this next part of the stanza, we get the deictic pronoun taking us to that place. As I said before, it's immediate. Here, every spring. What happens? They do this every spring. It's a ritual. It's a routine. I would fill the jampots of the jellied specks to range on window sills at home, on shelves at school, and wait and watch until the flattening docks burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Look at that verb in the middle there, until they burst, and that exciting sound, emotive with its final plosive. The joy of this is also shown in the alliteration of the J, the short vowels, jampots, jellied, specks, window sills at home. And notice how I've marked it with the arches. He often goes from an A to an O in jampots, at home, fattening dots, and later on, mammy frog. It's just a little echo of that mood, I think, that shows that shift. A, O. It's almost an excitement, an acceptance, and then an excitement. And the swimming tadpoles, A, O. It's there again, I've missed that one, but it is there. The daddy frog was called a bullfrog. And then look at the second part where you get the longer vowels. Ow, O, ow, or, O, ow, A. Those longer sounds. The reassurance from the teacher that this is right, this is normal, this is fine. But it's interesting to go back. Watching the tadpoles grow is a moment of excitement. And the adverbial until the fattening docks burst into nimble swimming tadpoles. Nimble swimming. Look at the assonance of the short vowels that create the excitement and the frisson of those things jittering around in the jar. Notice also at the end in the green there, you could tell the weather by frogs too. You could. He's speaking for the generic self, the generic identity. The children could, we all could, they all could, you could. Quite colloquial. He brings us into his narrative, brings us into his recount. And now Heaney signals a volta, a turn with the temporal marker then. Then one hot day when fields were rank with cow dung in the grass, the angry frogs invaded the flax-dam. It's quite dramatic. It's an invasion. It's a place that's rank and smelly with cow dung. And the frogs now are not exciting and innocent, they're angry. They're full of emotion, as if they're a threat, a danger. And notice what he does. He ducks. I ducked through the hedge to a coarse croaking that I had not heard before. This is a transition, and the going through that hedge is a rite of passage from the childhood innocence into this world of something coarse and croaking. And the harsher consonants there create that. The air was thick with a bass chorus. Right down to the damn gross-bellied frogs were cocked on sods. Their loose necks pulsed like sails. Some hopped. The slap and plop were obscene threats. Some sat poised like mud grenades, their blunt heads farting. I sickened, turned and ran. The great slime kings were gathered there for vengeance, and I knew that if I dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. The elder poet here looks back at his memory and he sees the moment that he is disgusted by nature, by life, instead of the childhood innocence and the lack of awareness of reproduction and what creates the tadpoles. Here you get a sense of visceral nature and the crudeness and the physicality of it. Even the senses of it are quite gross. The air was thick with a bass chorus, and you get that sense of post-pubescent masculinity. Bass chorus. These frogs are not daddy frogs. They are male. They are stacked. The frogs are cocked on sods, and their loose necks pulse like sails. The imagery here is evocative, but it's also violent with all of the harshness. Some hopped. The slap and plop were obscene threats. Even though you've got those quite innocent words like hopped and slap and plop with their onomatopoeic sounds and the short sounds and the plosives, these sounds have become something a little bit more sinister, and they are metaphorically threats. There's something about this sensual nature of the male frogs stacked on each other that is disgusting. Some sat poised like mud grenades. And there's the violence, there's the tension. That simile creates a sense of male violence, predatory, as if they will explode at any moment. And even their heads, blunt heads farting. You've got a childhood image there of a joke, but there doesn't seem to be any laughter or comedy in it. I sickened, turned and ran. It's disgusting for Heaney. And that triplet of verbs displays his displeasure. I sickened, turned and ran. And in the last few lines we get the great slime kings were gathered there. You get that aggrandizing epithet that elevates the frogs to great slime kings. They're gathered there, and what are they? There's a drama taking place here. They're gathered for vengeance. Vengeance against whom? Vengeance against Heaney for taking their frog spawn. And he feels the guilt of taking it. Taking all that frog spawn, putting it in jars and watching it develop and grow. He knows that if he dipped my hand, the spawn would clutch it. Interestingly, that frog spawn has become spawn now, which has got a slightly more sinister overtone. And there's a sense that it would be determined to get him. He's threatened by nature. He's threatened by this gross masculinity that intimidates. If you look back, I've circled thick, sickened, kings, dipped, it. And it's interesting how that short vowel unites the unpleasantness of the moment, the feeling he has in him, with the kings, the frogs, and the idea of dipping his hand into that world. Some people have seen this as a poem of Heaney, a young man emerging into an adult world and feeling unpleasant, feeling reticent, feeling insecure about what he is to become if he sees himself like the frogs in that way. Here I've shown you a picture of some flax, which when it's growing in the spring and the summer is beautiful and colours the fields gloriously. Flax was used to make a very heavy kind of cotton, and it used to once grow across the countryside, and here you see it looking beautiful. As you can see here in the production of the flax, they would take the lint and soak it for weeks in a man-made dam in order for the fibres to be separated from the straw stalk for spinning to thread. And this is what would stink. This would be the mess where the frogs would go to mate. This is what disgusts Heaney. Here's a picture from the 50s, so you can see well into Heaney's childhood years, people still working the land and collecting flax. Now I've just given you some rather interesting pictures which we could look at with the eyes of the naturalist and see the beauty of these things, this life generating. But we can also see from Heaney's point of view the slobber of it, the touch of it, the spawn of it, which has also got these rather insidious alien type qualities. And there in the pond you see so much frog spawn, filling it like some peculiar growth that emerges and swamps the place as if it would consume it all. Quite grotesque in many respects. And whilst we might look at this frog and see a childhood innocent creature of something that makes a quaint little noise, this is what we often associate with frogs, a single frog, solitary, that children would delight in. But then when the frogs are mating and they gather, they become a mass, moving, slimy creatures, dominating, hence the metaphor in Heaney's poem, invading. And as the frogs gather, they mount each other. Cocked sods, he calls them. Grenades, farting, unpleasant, an orgy of disgust. And yet also for all of us as adults, there is still the wonder of this, the wonder of the natural world, where creatures reproduce. And in the poem, Heaney's looking at the processes of life and seeing his place in it as an emerging persona, from the childhood innocent joy of collecting frog spawn in jam pots to becoming aware of a wider world, a world where reproduction, death and life go on